housing market has a boomer problem. Or at least that's what people have been saying for years. You probably heard the theory. Baby boomers own a huge percentage of the real estate in the United States. And as they age, all of that inventory is supposedly going to hit the market at once and flood supply. People have called it the silver tsunami. But here's the thing. They've been saying this for more than a decade. And so far, they've been wrong. The crash hasn't happened. The market hasn't been flooded. And boomers, for the most part, have done the opposite of what people expected. They've stayed put. They've aged in place, and many of them have the financial means to do exactly that. A lot of boomers own their houses outright. Others locked in ultra low mortgage rates, so they're under very little pressure to sell. That's why the housing market has been able to absorb the properties that have changed hands without any kind of major collapse. But even though the tsunami idea has been overblown, the demographic shift itself is very real. Boomers are now, on average, in their 70s. They still own an enormous share of the United States real estate. And eventually, whether they want to or not, the property is going to transfer. Some of it will be sold, some of it will be on the family, and some heirs are going to keep those homes while others will sell them. So I don't think we're headed into some sudden silver tsunami that crashes the housing market. But I do think we're a long-term period where more inventory gradually comes on the market, and that matters because even if it's not a wave, it's a tide. And that slow shift is going to create opportunities for owners, heirs, and investors who think strategically. So here's the point. This is not just a housing story, it's a wealth transfer story. And the people who handle it well are going to be the ones who understand how to turn equity into income. If you're a boomer who owns real property or even just second property, the smartest move may not be to sell. It may be to optimize. A lot of owners are sitting on three things right now. Cash flow, equity, and flexibility. And that flexibility is powerful because if you're not under pressure to sell, you get to make decisions strategically instead of emotionally. That means you may be able to hold the property, generate income from it, and use that income to support retirement. And if you need access to capital, you may be able to tap into that equity without fully selling the asset. That could mean refinancing. It could mean a line of credit. It could mean restructuring things in a way that gives you liquidity while still preserving your ownership. Of course, this is something to talk through with your CPA and financial advisor, but there's tax benefits as well. But the bigger idea is this: selling is not your only option, and in many cases, it may not even be your best option because a well-run rental property can continue producing monthly income long after the owner stops actively managing it. That's where professional property management becomes so important, aka VP property management. A VP property manager does a lot more than collect rent. They preserve the condition of the property, they keep vacancy low, they reduce the risk of deferred maintenance, they help stabilize income, and they allow owners to continue benefiting from the property without having to deal with the day-to-day burden of being a landlord. That can be a huge advantage for older owners who want a cash flow but do not want the stress. And it becomes even more important when the property transitions to the next generation. Because one of the biggest pieces of this demographic shift is inheritance. And a lot of homes are not going to hit the market the traditional way. They're going to be passed down. And when that happens, families are still going to be faced with a major decision. Do we sell this property or do we keep it? That question deserves more thought than it usually gets, because an inherited property is not just a house. It could be a paid off asset. It could be a low payment property in a strong rental area. It could be a monthly income stream. And in some cases, it could be the start of a long-term generational wealth. A lot of families think selling is the smart move because it feels simple. But simple is not always strategic. If the property is paid off or has a low monthly payment, if there's not a bunch of deferred maintenance, and if it's a neighborhood that rents well, keeping that property as a rental may actually be a better financial decision. And that's the last point that matters. Just because a house is in a nice neighborhood doesn't always mean it makes a great rental. Sometimes neighborhoods that are too expensive don't have the strongest rental demand relative to the price of the home. What you really want is a property in an area where good tenants consistently want to rent and where the numbers still make sense. If an heir inherits even one property that checks all these boxes, that property could become a meaning source of cash flow. Not just one-time check, an income stream. And that's a totally different way to look at inheritance. Instead of asking, how much can we sell this for? You start asking, what can this property produce every month? That shift in thinking is huge because one inherited property run correctly can create long-term value for a family. But of course, there's one big challenge. Most heirs don't want to become landlords overnight. They may live out of state. They may not know how to screen tenants. They may not want to deal with the maintenance, leasing, rent collection, or turnover. And that's exactly why a strong property manager can make all the difference. The right manager allows the family to keep the asset without taking on the full burden of managing it. That changes the question. That changes the whole equation. Now, instead of inheriting a headache, they're inheriting a professionally managed income-producing property. And in a market where appreciation may be slower going forward, that kind of steady cash flow becomes even more important. Because that's the reality. That's really the bigger market takeaway here. That's really the bigger market takeaway here. This long-term boomer to heir transition probably means more inventory over time, and more inventory usually means slower appreciation, not a crash. Just more pressure on pricing, more choices, better inventory, and potentially better deals. That's actually good news for investors and buyers who are focused on fundamentals. It means the easy appreciation story may fade, and the focus shifts back to what really matters. Cash flow, operations, asset quality, and smart management. So when people talk about the silver tsunami, I think they're focused on the wrong part of the story. The real story is not panic, it's transition. It's a slow transfer of housing, equity, and opportunity from one generation to the next. And the winners are going to be the people who plan for the transition instead of react to it. The owners who keep their properties producing income. The families who recognize when an inherited house should become a rental instead of being sold. And the investors who understand that slower appreciation does not mean fewer opportunities. It means you need a better strategy. So, no, I do not think the silver tsunami is going to crash the housing market, but I do think this demographic shift is real. I do think it will create long-term upward pressure on inventory, and I do think it will reward people who know how to turn equity into cash flow and properties into long-term performing assets. Because in the years ahead, this is going to be less about timing, and it's going to be less about timing the market and more about managing the transition well. If you have multiple properties and you're wondering how to transition them to the next generation of people, or if you have loved ones who have lots of properties and you're wondering what are we going to do with them when those people pass on, talk with VP Property Management to set up long-term property management on those properties, or once you inherit those, we'd love to talk with you about a plan to keep them producing cash flow for you for generations. Click the link below to schedule a call.